As OTAs wrap up, what are the brewing camp battles that we need to watch come training camp? Today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Locked On Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for free on every platform, starting with YouTube, where you can like, sub, and hit that bell right now for us, as well as all the audio platforms, including Spotify and Apple, where you can get every show on here. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the network. Check out another Locked On show for your next one, whether you're tuning up for the next fantasy season or you want intel on the AFC West foes, whatever you need, you can get it at Locked On. I'm ready for this because this is the exciting part. We've heard bits and pieces, but what comes next? What are we going to look at here as a mandatory minicamp is coming up later in the week? We'll have Matt Derrick on tomorrow to talk about that, and we'll be recapping later in the week as well. Remember, for you everydayers, we are here 5 days a week, no matter what. But then what happens next? That's where we're going today. I'm intrigued. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, NFL33.com, and RGR Football.
And I'm Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner, and there's a lot of camp battles that's going to be going on, and that's going to be what is going to be a lot of fun to get into. Minicamp is going to be kicking off this coming weekend, but after that, then we start getting into training camp and the players that are a report. So looking forward to that and looking forward to all the camp battles that we're going to be able to talk about when training camp starts here in late July.
Yeah. I mean, when we take a look at the way this roster has been built, and folks, after mandatory minicamp coming up the week after, we'll give you a 53-man roster preview. We're going to do this a couple times this year as we generally only do one just before the conclusion of training camp. We're going to give you some updates along the way. So for you everydayers, you're going to hear several versions of it. For you folks, if you'd like and sub, you'd want to do that. If you want more information, you can get that through the text line at 816-357-8781, and you can get connected with us that way. I like looking at this multiple times now because things change. And we've seen experimentation in OTAs before. There's some of that going on, but there's definitely guys that kind of surge in the OTAs and then other guys that surge in training camp. And those battles, we get a little bit of a preview this year. We talked yesterday about some of the offensive tackles. If you want to hear a little bit more about specifics there, go back and listen to yesterday's show. But I do see this as maybe the top two are set. It feels like that. But the scramble to be the backups in what I think has to be probably a 9-man offensive line unit on the 53 this year, it feels like the backup tackle spots are in scramble mode. Do you get that feeling as well? And who do you see is the front runners to back up Donovan Smith on the left and Juwan Taylor on the right?
I do see it that way, and you basically stole everything I was about to say. When you start looking, no, you're good. When you start looking at the 53, and we're, like Ryan said, we'll talk about that next week. When we start looking at the 53, and this is kind of what we're talking about right now, I honestly think that looking at this roster, I would say most of the starting positions are already figured out. The starters probably aren't going to change. It's the depth positions. There are some situations where maybe you could say a starter, maybe specifically a wide receiver, could be something that is up there, but the reality on most of it is that all the starters are set. So I do think we're talking about backup positions, and when you start looking at the tackles, it's going to be Wanya Morris, and it's a question of, do they keep 4? I would expect that they're going to keep 4, just because that's generally the way it works out, but that's the big question right now. If they don't keep 4, Lucas Niang is on the outside looking in. I still think he makes this roster and is probably the 4th tackle. Whether or not he backs up left or right, that's up in the air. But the other side of it, and I need to say this, the other side of it is we won't really know what Lucas Niang is until they put the pads on and they've been going for about a week. Yeah. When you actually get to see what he's able to do and what they're able to have him do, then you could get an idea of what he is able to do and what they think he's capable of doing going forward.
I agree with you. Wanya Morris is going to be the 3 no matter what. The draft stock expenditure to acquire him puts him on this roster no matter what.
I would argue, I don't know that he's going to be the number 3 no matter what. I think he's going to be on the roster no matter what.
Okay, well, like you were saying, if it's a battle of only keeping 3 versus 4.
No, I agree with that.
That's why I put it that way. But what gets interesting there, and what we will see at mandatory minicamp coming up here, folks, is all the pass sets. And quite frankly, that's the more important case for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid is, can Lucas get his pass set form back like it was before? Because he has been pretty nimble, especially for a guy his size that's built the way he is, a little bit more out front. He's able to set 45 really well and vertically pretty well also. And so the recovery from the injury is really what's going to be important. And I particularly watching that post leg, the interior leg, that is what is going to drive him back. And that's probably something that I got to feel Andy Heck is really focused on as well. But that leg, the left leg of Lucas Niang, may determine not only his future, but the future of Prince Tega Wanogho, who's probably the guy right next in line that would be pushing him. If there is only 4, that's the battle that I expect to see. I'm pulling for Hardy Anderson, and I like the concept of Jerome Carvin, although I think Carvin will play inside. But really, I think Prince Tega Wanogho's number 5 at this point. I think he's the only guy that can even push either of the backups right now. And I'm not sure that even in that battle, there's enough there to warrant making a change, given the investiture that you have in both Wanogho and Lucas Niang.
I don't disagree with you, but the one caveat I will say is that until the pads come on, offensive line is kind of up in the air to an extent.
Yeah,
I do think I think Wanya Morris is going to be on the roster no matter what. I agree with you on that. I guess with the one caveat of injured reserve, that's not technically on the roster, but hope we don't have to worry about that. But Carvin is an interesting one. Is it going to be a situation where he shows up and he just makes himself make the roster in some way, shape, or form?
Could be.
We
right?
won't know. We won't know until we see what he's able to do on the field, because being able to do OTAs and getting the offense down that way is way different than actually getting in the trenches and being able to hold your own in the trenches. So that's what is going to be the important thing to see.
I agree. When we take a look at who else is going to be on the offensive line in terms of camp battles, I think it is between Nick Allegretti and Austin Ryder for the backup center spot or the interior swing spot. That lands firmly in Nick Allegretti's court as far as I'm concerned. And the reason is because the other guy that I think could be the backup on the interior, but with an asterisk, is Darian Kennard. He's gotten some tackle reps even in OTAs, and he certainly did last season. As I've said from the get-go, he is a better guard in the NFL than he is a tackle in the NFL. But having that experience and starting at Kentucky at right tackle, if there were some kind of catastrophic injury on the offensive line, he is a guy that you could swing out to right tackle and try to make do with.
Yeah, and you're going to have to help him a lot, but that's definitely something that you could do. And he's guaranteed a spot in my mind on this roster. Allegretti, I think really you look at all the starters and you look at Wanye and you look at Allegretti and you look at Kennard, and I think all 8 of those guys are guaranteed spots. I really do think it's down to 1, maybe 2 spots if they keep 10. And that's going to be the big question is, are they going to keep 10 or are they going to keep 9? I think that that's going to be something that maybe goes down to even really right before cuts to figure out who they're going to be keeping.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, cuts are something that are a long way off, but we can start to see it from here. And it's not just cuts, but it's acquisitions. Yes, there are still spots on this roster that could use some bolstering. What's strong and what's weak? We're going to get to that right after I remind you guys about, hey, if you want to get in the action, whether it's the NBA finals that are going on right now, I know some of that's a surprise, or whether it's the coming football season, you want to get into it at FanDuel because they are the place to be come playoffs. And right now they're offering you a great no sweat first bet for up to $2,500 in bonus bets that get put back onto your account if your first bet loses. It is an insurance policy on your first bet, and all you have to do is go sign up at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can see it here underneath me on YouTube. It's a no sweat first bet for new users. Up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Only at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's at FanDuel, America's official sports betting partner of the NBA, the MLB, and most importantly, our all favorite, the NFL. Now, this is a championship roster we're talking about, right? That's had a couple of losses. Most recently, Frank Clark. We filled you guys in on the Friday free agency thing last week. If you missed that show, remember, we are here 5 days a week for you everydayers, you locos that follow us that incessantly. You can go back and listen to Friday's show, and we'll give you the rundown on Frank Clark. That was maybe thought to be another clean acquisitions as they've had in joining the team on the cheap contracts of late. But that threw things off a little bit. I think we've talked edge ad nauseum. I think that at this point, there's enough bodies to go around. I do think there's probably a Carlos Dunlap in the future or something along those lines after the Chris Jones deal gets done. And we'll talk in a minute about what Jones's deal is going to do in terms of other battles. But
I just want to throw the caveat of if Jones's deal gets done, we threw out Daniel Hunter last week, but I wouldn't put it past Brett Veach to go out and get another guy. I don't know who it would be, but I wouldn't put it past him to go get another D end. I understand we've talked about it ad nauseum, but it would not shock me for them to not feel great about that position and try to get somebody that's going to be more of a contributor than a guy like Dunlap who's just going to kind of fill in the role.
Yeah, and that's fair. I'm sure a lot of folks out in Chiefs Kingdom right now are talking to their cars or their phones right now to say, Chris, Ryan, they should go get Chase Young because Washington's a mess and they have a new owner and they need to start over and they didn't give him the 5th year. And yes, that would be another option that I'm sure there's already been conversations about what it's going to take and that kind of thing. Time has a tendency to pull down values and costs in terms of trades. So yes, that could be another option down there, but that's again, all post Chris Jones. In the meantime, I think that in terms of bodies, I think that's a fairly strong position because there's a lot of concepts there. And as we see the changing, the evolution of the defensive front, what I think has been lost, and I don't think that there are many, certainly national analysts, but even local analysts addressing the fact that the interior defensive line on this roster right now is weak. There's no other way to put it. And I hate to be, I'm not trying to be a shock jock here. It is lighter than people want to admit because Turk Wharton's coming off of a significant injury. Keondre Coburn, as much as I like him, is a rookie. It is Derek Nottie and Chris Jones, and that's it. Everything else is a complete toss in the air right now. And I think that's a bigger concern than we and certainly the national media have been giving it lately.
Well, and I hate to throw this out there, but the other concern is that, yeah, you say you have Chris Jones. Well, he hasn't reported anything yet. We'll see if he reports to mandatory minicamp. I would expect he's going to be reporting, during the season and to training camp. But he's not happy Frank Clark is gone. So, you start talking about depth on the defensive interior. Obviously, losing Chris Jones would hurt, but it's going to hurt even more because you're right. They don't have the depth. You hope that Turk Wharton was able to step in and be a guy kind of like what Colin Saunders was last year. But the reality is you don't have any guaranteed depth in that position. You're really betting on Coburn to be able to step in and do something more than rookies generally that are taking that late do. And you have a guy in Derek Nottie who's great at run stopping maybe, but he's not really been doing anything else. So it's not really going to help you in most situations.
Yeah. Well, and so how do they combat that? What we've seen so far and what we fully expect is that Charles Omenihu, Mike Dana, and George Karlaftis, 3 guys that are listed as edges, are going to get increased snaps inside at tackle, particularly in pass rush situations. But is that enough? If Derek Nottie gets hurt, you have injury recovery Turk Wharton or rookie Keondre Coburn trying to start next to Chris Jones. And that's just not enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's another thing. You get the Jones situation taken care of. Maybe you make a trade for somebody on the interior. I mean, you could look at it either different direction. It could go D end or it could go T tackle. I think that's a position that would make a lot of sense. The problem is getting somebody that's going to be able to step in and actually do what you need to do is going to be costly because you're going to be looking for a guy that can be a pass rushing DT, and those cost a lot of money.
Yeah, that is no lie. They are very specific.
Or draft capital, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I think the bigger concern for me, longevity wise. Like we talked about yesterday in Andy Reid's philosophy, for Brett Veach's philosophy going forward, giving up draft capital isn't something that he wants to do. So those are a couple of positions that have some strength and some weakness that we think might be addressed. But how do they do that? Where can they add some help that can help them in 2023? We're going to touch on that right after this. So help is always something that we look at, I think, in terms of where the holes. There's not a ton of holes on this roster, right? We addressed the defensive tackle spot last segment. We've talked about the whole concept of DeAndre Hopkins here. That's a value add, in my opinion. That's not filling a hole. I think they can go win a championship with the receivers that are on this roster right now. Do you disagree?
I think you're being optimistic, and I'm not saying that you're wrong, because what we don't know is what is how big of a jump is Sky Moore going to take? How big of a jump is Kadarius Toney going to take? How big of a jump is, quite frankly, MVS going to take? MVS could have a huge impact as well. I mean, when you start looking at the wide receivers, Rashee Rice could come in and have a huge impact. So could they? Yes. Would it be helpful to have another, somebody you can count on to be a contributor at that position? Yeah, I think so. I don't know that I am quite to the point of saying it's just a value add. I think that they're still a little light at wide receiver until we actually see things in training camp and get an idea as to what the wide receiver is actually able to do against actual competition. Because the corner group in this franchise is very good. So they're going to be going up against good competition. We're going to be able to see them fight against good competition at camp every day.
Yeah. And that's honestly the best way to improve the roster is to grow it from within through competition. I agree with you there. What do you see as some place where they could use some help, where there is the possibility for an addition that could contribute to 2023?
I think there's lots of different places you could go. We talked about DT already, wide receiver as well. Potentially, if there was somebody that was a mid-level tight end that you think could actually step in and actually be somebody that they'd kind of push Kelsey to sit a little bit more. I think that would be somebody that potentially you could look at, but I don't expect that there's going to be somebody like that. The tight ends in this league are so few and far between. The chances of them getting somebody to come in and do that would be very slim. But then you start looking at the defensive side of the ball, and corner seems to be pretty set. Safety seems to be pretty set. Although you could make an argument that maybe you're looking at another safety, more of a depth guy that can learn the defense this year and maybe step forward next year. That's certainly a position of possibility. Corner, I think, is pretty set. Linebacker, I think, is probably pretty set for the most part, unless they're able to find somebody that can step in and is just a shutdown linebacker when it comes to pass defense. But I don't think they're going to find that out there. You're also going to be in a situation where those guys are going to be expensive, because that's something that a lot of teams don't have. So, you're really looking at this roster, and I don't know if there's any great positions you can add. I mean, potentially running back, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
We've talked about Dalvin Cook. I don't think after this past weekend, I don't think that's going to really be an option. It sounds like he's wanting a big contract. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, it will not be in Kansas City. But
it's good to watch things. I don't know if it's going to materialize for him, but that's just me.
Well, and you're right. I mean, it may not materialize, but if he is trying to get a bigger contract, he's not going to be looking at teams that aren't going to be paying, and probably not going to be going to a team that he isn't going to start, and he's not going to start in Kansas City. So I think you're really limited as to what you can add to this roster right now. I'm not saying that there aren't weaknesses per se, but to really be able to add the talent that you want, you're going to have to spend either a lot of money or draft picks. And I don't see Kansas City really being able or wanting to do either.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and given where you're coming from, let me circle back to the top of the show when we talk camp battles. Here's another one for you. And some folks are going to argue whether it's even a thing or not, but I'm going to say that it's going to be. It's very specific and it's niche. It's cornerback 6. Because I think 1 through 5 are set. I agree with you. But I think cornerback 6 is a guy that's got to be able to play nickel and he's got to be able to play teams. And I think right now it's probably a very close battle between Najee Johnson, who played special teams last year, and the young guy, Nick Jones, because he's been getting a lot of looks with the ones while L'Jarius and McDuffie have not been out on the field in OTAs. So that's a feeling out process. But in a cornerback group that I feel is like very young and very up and coming, and we both feel is pretty set, cornerback 6, given the safety group, I think you keep 10 DBs, and that means there's got to be a 6th corner. That might be the biggest battle that we have to watch.
Could be, and that's going to be tough. I mean, you start talking about keeping 10 DBs, you're going to be arguing that you're probably going to be keeping 10 D linemen as well, probably 5 linebackers. I mean, that puts you at 25 right there. That's your defense in essence, and that doesn't even get over the offensive side where they usually keep 26 and the defense keeps less. That they've done that a lot more than they've gone even. So that's something to watch. I can see what you're saying a little bit to, a guy like Nick Jones and who can play that CB6 position for this team. But again, I go back to what I said before. Unless you're going to get a guy that can play primarily teams and maybe be a nickel for you in case of emergency break glass type guy, then I don't think that's a position that Kansas City's going to be looking for. I think you've got to roll with what you have, because CB is another position where it's a huge premium position and you're going to be paying extra money or extra draft picks to bring somebody in.
Yeah, I agree. I think they have all the prospects they need on the roster. It's how many do they keep and who wins that out. We'd like to know what you think. Put your comments in the YouTube comments. That certainly helps, as well as the Spotify and Apple Music reviews. We would appreciate that. Remember, we are here 5 days a week. You can get all the other information from the other shows. You can get the text at 816-357-8781. But every day, as you guys know, that tomorrow's Wednesday, and that means Matt and Derek's going to be here to give us the insider view from the beat. Matt Derek is a beat reporter over at ChiefsDigest.com. You can get more information from him there. He will be here today. Then we start looking at mandatory camp and what's different, who shows up. I'm sure Chris Jones will be a question mark. And then what flows from that. So the week is full. You want to be here every day. So get subbed, hit the like and the bell here on YouTube as well. But we appreciate you taking your Tuesday with us. Until we get Matt back, thank you for your time. We're going to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks for listening today, and we'll talk to you then.